In the last video, we summarized the 4 different tissue types. Remember, nervous tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, epithelial tissue. And we started talking about the general qualities of epithelial tissue. The cells are closely packed together, so it's not easy for things to get through from one side to the other. The cells have got their feet on basement membrane. The top layer of cells, if there's more than one layer, has got a free surface. And they are categorized by these 3 cell shapes and these 3 arrangements of layers. Let's talk about them specifically. One of the things that I really like about your textbook is in this particular chapter is that they not only have got pictures through the microscope of these different tissues, but they've had an artist go back and draw what you're supposed to see. And I think that's just so useful because I don't know about you guys, but when I was first learning this, I had a tremendous amount of difficulty like seeing what they were talking about. Another thing, on exam 2, I'm going to ask you questions like, where will I find simple squamous epithelium, right? And there are a lot of examples. And if you read your textbook, and I'm sure you have, you'll see there are a lot of examples. I'm not asking you to know them all, okay? But I do want you to know these that are in bold with an underline under them, okay? So I might say the type of tissue that lines the air sacs of the lungs are, and you need to know it's simple squamous, not simple cuboidal, okay? That'll narrow things down. So now we're going to look at individual epithelial cells. Let me point out one thing. These cells that are squamous, when we say they're flat, they're not just kind of flat. They are way flat. They are super flat. Even their nucleus has gotten squished to make the cell really, really flat. And the reason that we have them, and it's in italics, so it's probably on the exam, is because it's easy for substances to pass through them. I should say, it's easy for substances to diffuse across them. You know what diffusion is now because you've had that lab. And wherever the body is going to rely on diffusion, like to get oxygen into the blood or CO2 out of the blood, right? These are places where we're going to have simple squamous epithelium. So oxygen going into the blood at the air sacs, oxygen leaving the blood at the blood vessels, right? So here's the drawing. Here is the image. Do you see how flat these cells are? Really, really easy to see. Oh, I keep telling you what they look like because that's how they're categorized, but there won't be any images for you to identify on exam 2. Right, simple cuboidal. It's a single layer of cube-shaped cells. Are they cube-shaped? I don't think so. You know, if I were staring at these cells and I were you, I would say, well, that one's kind of flat. That one's kind of like a cube. Oh, I don't know. Look, if you ever have to stare at cells trying to decide if they are round or flat or cube-shaped, it's cuboidal, okay? Because squamous epithelial cells are super flat, and I will show you columnar are super tall and skinny. So cuboidal, if you ever have to stop and think, oh, gee, are those what? Cuboidal, okay? And the tubules in the kidneys that we will be talking about, but I think it's for the final exam. I think so. They are all constructed out of cuboidal epithelium. And I always think of it as like, okay, there's one layer of cells, so diffusion is probably a thing with them, but they must do more than just diffusion, and they need place to put the equipment that does that, and that's why they're cuboidal. And that certainly describes the kidney tubules. Epithelial tissue, simple columnar, one layer of tall, narrow cells. Did I tell you if you have to stop and think, right? Because look at how tall and skinny these are, like columns that would hold up a Greek temple or something like that, right? So simple columnar, a single layer of tall cells. The most common place that we will find them is lining our intestinal tract. And one of the reasons is that these cells are really important for making and releasing enzymes into the intestines, and then for doing active transport of digested molecules from whatever you ate into your bloodstream. Okay, so here's what it actually looks like. Really tall, really thin. Why is that such a pretty shade of purpley pink? That is the color that mucus stains with a certain kind of dye. These are mucus secreting cells, and that's a layer of mucus. All of the internal epithelial surfaces, the inside of your nose, the inside of your lungs, the inside of your intestinal tract, all covered with mucus. Okay. Now, pseudostratified. Pseudostratified, I think they really invented that name just to keep people at anatomy conferences from resorting to fisticuffs. That is boxing, right? Because evidently people used to argue, no, it's one layer of cells, no, it's many layer of cells, no, it's... Okay, so they said, fine, we'll just make up a different term, pseudostratified. Because you can understand, it's like, is that one layer of cells or is that 3 layers of cells? You could make an argument, evidently people did. But it turns out that all of them really have at least a toe touching the basement membrane. Not all of them reach the apical surface at the same time. So pseudostratified. Now, these are really important because they line the respiratory passageways. So your trachea is lined with these, your nose lined with these, your bronchi lined with those, right? And this is what it looks like. And you see this pretty fringe on the outside, that pretty fringe, those are cilia. When we were talking before exam 1 about the different organelles, we talked about cilia. Cilia is super important for protecting your lungs. Those cilia and the mucus on top of them, made by these cells, create this barrier to infection that we will talk about when we get to the lungs, right? And then we have got stratified squamous. Now, you could look at this and you could go, Dr. Tydell, those are not squamous. You told me squamous were easy to see. You are right. I would not categorize those as squamous. I would categorize those as cuboidal. However, as the cells mature and they go to this apical surface, they do get very, very flat. And we categorize the entire tissue by the shape of the mature cells. And that's why this one is considered stratified squamous. And the outer layer of the dermis, the outer layer of the epidermis is, the outer layer of the skin, which is the epidermis, is stratified squamous epithelium. So all of that makes up the epidermis. Ready? Let's see, transitional. I'm just kind of obsessed with transitional. Transitional is like, breaks all the rules, right? Is it one layer? Is it multiple layers? Are they cuboidal? Are they squamous? Why? Because they've got a very special job to do. Their job is to create a surface that can stretch and then snap back without leaving any wrinkles in the surface. That is not easy to do, okay? Your stomach can't do this. Your stomach, if you look at it when it's empty, it's all wrinkled up inside. And then if you have a big old Thanksgiving dinner, it stretches out and it's smooth. And then when you empty it out, it's all wrinkled up inside. Now, the urinary bladder of humans, if our urinary bladder was built the way our stomach is built, we would die of bacterial bladder infections very early in life. So life invented this special kind of epithelium called transitional. Here's what it looks like when your bladder is empty. They're all piled up on top of each other. Here's what it looks like when the bladder is full, all stretched out, right? So cool. So when your bladder is empty, there are no little wrinkles for bacteria to hide in. But when your bladder is full, it doesn't rip apart. One more thing. I forgot to tell you why life invented stratified squamous epithelium, and I really should have. We've got all those layers everywhere that there is going to be what's called abrasive force. Okay, abrasion, like if you're running through the wheat fields of Kansas or something like that, and you've got abrasion against your arm, it is constantly rubbing off these layers of epithelial cells. And as a matter of fact, even when I'm just sitting here not doing anything, layers of epithelial cells are just kind of falling off onto the carpet. That's a creepy idea. But you know that like there's some crazy amount, like when you see dust on a shelf, right? And you run your finger along it and you're like, oh, it's got dust. It's like, I don't know, half of it is made out of old skin cells, which is weird, right? We're losing skin cells all the time. And that's what it's there for. So you could, the stratified squamous epithelium on layers like your knees are so thick that you can like, if you ever fall off a skateboard and skin your knee, you can have like a bilbo flap of skin coming off, but it doesn't bleed because remember, epithelium has got no blood vessels running through it. So if you skin your knee, it doesn't bleed until you get past the stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelium, it is really difficult for anything to diffuse across it because there's just so many layers, and they're mostly filled, at least your skin, with this protein called keratin that makes the skin relatively waterproof. Alrighty, these are less common epithelial tissues, and you'll see they're disappearing. Oh no, it's okay. They're not going to be on exam 2. We're not going to be discussing them, so we can just slide right past this slide. Here is something that you need to know, though. You need to know that glands, G-L-A-N-D-S, glands, are made out of epithelial tissue. So there are some parts of the body that are organs that are mostly composed of glandular epithelium. Your liver is mostly glandular epithelium. Your salivary glands are mostly glandular epithelium. Your pancreas is mostly glandular epithelium. So are these cells cuboidal? Yes, but we don't usually categorize glandular epithelium on the basis of its cell shape. We consider it glandular epithelium if that tissue is busy making substances that the cells will spit out by exocytosis. You know what that is now. And if the exocytosis goes into little tiny tubes called ducts that go into bigger ducts that finally go to the outside of the body or into the intestinal tract, then those are called exocrine glands. And your pancreas, this is actually a drawing of the pancreas. Your pancreas has got a lot of these cells that are kind of golden tan color here that make digestive enzymes that get put into this little tiny tube that get gathered up into bigger and bigger tubes that get thrown into your intestines when food is present to help digest your food. So that part of the pancreas is exocrine. We call it exocrine because the exit means to go to the outside. So exocrine they make stuff that goes to the outside. Sweat glands would be exocrine glands too. Okay? And then we have got endocrine glands. Endocrine glands, when you think of endocrine, you probably start to think about hormones now. And this is also the pancreas, but this is the endocrine portion. These are the cells that make hormones like insulin. And it's called endocrine because those cells are going to make hormones, spit them out, and they go directly into the bloodstream. And it stays in the body. Alrighty, we're going to start here at the beginning of the next video.